Imagine being a Roman emperor so bored with standard executions that you ordered a criminal to be dressed as a mythic hero and actually mauled by a bear, just for the artistic value of the play. This wasn't a horror movie, it was a Tuesday at the Colosseum. I'm Matt, and this is Forgotten Chronicle HQ. 4 months ago, we did 101 facts about Rome, and it became our biggest video ever. But since then, I've been digging through the archives, and frankly, I realized I barely scratched the surface. Today, we're looking at the Roman Empire 2.0. We're going deeper into the blood, the engineering genius, and the sheer madness that built the ancient world. Stick around, because by Fact 47, you'll realize why living like a Roman was actually a terrifying survival game. The Pantheon's dome is an engineering glitch. While we knew about the concrete, we only recently learned that its stability comes from the use of lighter volcanic pumice at the top and heavy basalt at the bottom. The greatest sewer is still in use. The Cloaca Maxima, built by the early kings of Rome around 600 BCE, still drains water from the Forum into the Tiber today. They used siphons to move water uphill. When an aqueduct had to cross a valley, they used lead pipes to create inverted siphons that used water pressure to push the flow back up the other side. Roman hot mixing concrete. In 2023, scientists discovered the secret to Roman concrete's 2,000-year life. Mixed the lime at high temperatures, creating lime clasts that allow cracks to self-heal. The Arch of Constantine is recycled. This famous monument is actually a Frankenstein arch. Most of its statues and reliefs were stripped from older monuments belonging to better emperors. The Groma was their GPS. This simple wooden cross with plumb bobs allowed Roman surveyors to lay out cities and roads with near-perfect right angles over hundreds of miles. The tomb of the baker is a giant oven. A wealthy baker named Eccentric built his tomb in the shape of a massive grain-kneading machine to show off the trade that made him rich. The Nemesis ships were floating palaces. Emperor Caligula built 2 massive ships on a tiny lake that featured marble floors, central heating, and even plumbing for fountains. Rome's first firewall. After the Great Fire, Nero mandated that buildings be made of stone rather than wood, and that they must be separated by gaps to prevent fire from jumping. The Appian Way goes 5 feet deep. Unlike modern roads, the first highway was a massive multi-layered trench of rubble, gravel, and stone, making it virtually indestructible. The right of 3 children. To boost the population, Roman law granted special legal independence to any woman who gave birth to 3 or more children. The sacred chickens decided wars. Generals wouldn't attack unless the sacred chickens ate their grain. One general, Claudius Pulcher, threw them into the sea when they refused to eat. He lost. Fathers could legally sell their sons. However, if a father sold his son into slavery 3 times, the son was legally freed from his father's authority forever. Blue eyes were considered scary. Romans associated blue eyes with the wild Germanic tribes and often found them intimidating or unrefined. The bulla protected children. Boys wore a locket called a bulla to ward off evil spirits until they reached manhood and dedicated it to the gods. Red hair meant slave status. Because many slaves were captured from Gaul or Germania, red hair was so associated with slavery that wealthy women would buy wigs made of barbarian hair. Professional mourners were a thing. Families hired women to wail and tear their hair at funerals. The louder the wailing, the more important the person seemed. The stola was a signal. Respectable married women wore this long tunic to signal their virtue. It was the ancient equivalent of a wedding ring. Roman wrenches look modern. Archaeologists have found iron wrenches that look almost identical to the ones you have in your garage today. Folding multi-tools. Roman travelers carried silver folding tools that included a spoon, a fork, a spatula, and a toothpick. Flaming pigs versus elephants. To counter war elephants, Romans would douse pigs in oil, light them on fire, and send them squealing toward the elephants to terrify them. Standard bearers wore animal skins. To be easily spotted in the blood and dust of battle, the signifer wore a bear or wolf skin over their helmet. Marius's mules. After the Marian reforms, soldiers had to carry 30 kilograms, 66 pounds, of their own gear, making the army faster, but the soldiers exhausted. The onager had a mule kick. This catapult was named after a wild donkey because of its violent recoil when it fired a stone. Soldiers were professional builders. A typical legionary spent more time building bridges, forts, and roads than actually fighting in battles. The Vindelander tablets are ancient DMs. Found in Britain, these wooden scraps include a birthday party invitation between two officers' wives. Scutum shields were plywood. They were made of 3 layers of wood glued in different directions to prevent the shield from splitting when hit. Legionaries were forbidden to marry. Until 197 CE, soldiers were legally single for their entire 25-year service to ensure total focus on the state. The centurion was the backbone. While generals came and went, the centurions were career soldiers who lived and died with their men, often for 30-plus years. Decurions were civic debtors. To be a local leader, you had to pay for public works. If the town couldn't pay its taxes to Rome, the decurions had to pay out of their own pockets. The year of the 5 emperors. In 193 CE, the empire was so unstable that 5 different men claimed the throne in a single year. Didius Julianus bought the empire. He won the throne in an actual auction held by the Praetorian Guard after they killed the previous emperor. Maximinus Thrax was a giant. Contemporary reports claimed this emperor was over 8 feet tall and could crumble stones with his bare hands. The Pomerium was a ghost line. This sacred boundary around Rome was so holy that no general could cross it with an army without losing his command. Tipping your barber. Shaving was a painful social ritual. Wealthy men would tip their favorite barbers for a clean, nick-free face. The first shave was a party. A boy's first shave was a religious ceremony. The hair was often placed in a gold box and dedicated to the gods. Garum smell laws. The fish sauce was so smelly that factories were legally banned from being built near residential areas. The umbra uninvited guest. It was socially acceptable for a guest to bring an umbra, a shadow, to a dinner party without asking. Honeyed wine, mulsum. This was the standard welcome drink at Roman dinner parties, used to prep the stomach for the feast. Snail farming. Romans fattened snails on milk until they grew so large they couldn't fit back into their shells. Rome's fire cycle. Because of oil lamps and wooden frames, major parts of Rome burned down roughly every 15 to 20 years. High floors were for the poor. With no elevators and constant fire risk, the higher you lived in an insula, the lower your social status. Bathhouse gyms. Romans played harpastuum, a violent ball game that was essentially rugby with fewer rules and more broken bones. Strigling as massage. Using the strigil wasn't just for cleaning. It was an aggressive muscle massage used by athletes to stay limber. Libraries in the baths. Romans believed a healthy body required a healthy mind, so every major bathhouse featured massive public libraries. Wrestling oil and sand. Athletes used fine sand to get a grip on their oiled-up opponents during wrestling matches. The Colossus of Nero gave the Colosseum its name. The stadium's real name is the Flavian Amphitheater, but locals called it the Colosseum because it stood next to Nero's giant statue. Myth-based executions. Criminals were sometimes forced to play characters in plays where the hero dies, except the death by bear or fire was real. Thumb signal confusion. A thumb tucked in likely meant mercy, while a thumb pushed out, like a sword being drawn, meant death. The hortiari, barley men. Gladiators were nicknamed this because their diet was almost entirely barley and beans to build a protective layer of fat. Gladiatrices, female gladiators. Though rare, women did fight in the arena until Emperor Septimius Severus banned the practice in 200 CE. The editor was the referee. The man paying for the games acted as the ultimate judge, deciding when a fight was over or if a loser should die. Water clocks. Clepsydra. Since sundials didn't work at night, Romans used dripping water to measure time in courts and homes. Cave cannon. Beware of dog. Mosaics of barking dogs at the front door were the ancient equivalent of a home security system. The laundry stomp. Falones, laundry workers, spent all day in vats of aged urine, stomping on clothes to remove grease and stains. Silk was a scandal. Conservative senators tried to ban silk because it was so thin and transparent, they considered it indecent. Golden milestone. In the center of the forum stood a gold-plated bronze pillar from which all distances in the empire were measured. Public fountains ran 24/7. Romans didn't have taps. The water flowed constantly through the streets, helping to keep the gutters clean. Odyssey as a textbook. Roman children didn't just learn to read, they were forced to memorize thousands of lines of Homer's epic poems. Abacus calculators. Roman accountants used boards with sliding beads to perform complex math that would be impossible with Roman numerals. Night schools. For those who worked during the day, teachers held classes in the streets under torches at night. Temples as banks. People didn't trust their houses. They stored their gold and wills in the Temple of Vesta because no one would dare rob a goddess. Slavery wasn't race-based. A Roman slave could be a Greek philosopher, a British farmer, or a Syrian merchant. The Vestal Virgin punishment. If a priestess broke her vow, she was buried alive in an underground chamber with a single loaf of bread and a lamp. Mithraism. This soldier's cult involved secret rituals in underground caves and was the biggest rival to Christianity. The Sibylline books. These were sacred prophecies only opened by the Senate when they thought the world was literally ending. The Tarpeian Rock. Traitors to Rome weren't just executed, they were thrown off a specific 25-meter cliff to their deaths. Black pepper trade. Romans were so obsessed with Indian pepper that it accounted for half of all trade between Rome and the East. Veto power. A tribune of the plebs could stop any law just by shouting veto. I forbid, a power that protected the poor from the rich. Fabricius Bridge. Built in 62 BCE, it is the oldest bridge in Rome, still in its original state, and still carries pedestrians today. Marcus Crassus was the first billionaire. His net worth was roughly $20 billion in today's money, enough to pay for his own private army. The Avis salute. While famous now, the stiff-armed salute was actually used to show that the greeter's hand was empty of weapons. Julian calendar drift. Caesar's calendar was off by 11 minutes a year. By the 1500s, the seasons were 10 days out of sync with the sun. The fire brigade scam. Crassus would bring his firefighters to a burning house and refuse to put it out until the owner sold him the property for pennies. Pontifex Maximus. This was the title of the head priest of Rome. Today, it is one of the official titles of the Pope. The 3rd century crisis. For 50 years, Rome had nearly 26 different emperors, and almost all of them were assassinated. Aurelian, restorer of the world. This emperor managed to reunite the entire split empire in just 5 years before being killed by his own clerks. The greatest library was Roman. The Library of Celsus in modern Turkey held 12,000 scrolls and was built as a tomb for a Roman senator, lead combs. To hide grey hair, Romans used lead-dipped combs, unknowingly poisoning themselves every time they groomed. Oyster farming. Romans built massive underwater stone beds to farm oysters, which were considered the French fries of the ancient elite. The Law of the 12 Tables. This was Rome's first written legal code, displayed in the Forum so that no judge could claim he didn't know the law. Roman fire insurance didn't exist. If your house burned, you lost everything. This is why the rich were so obsessed with stone architecture. Toga candida. When running for office, candidates wore a bright white toga, candida, which is where we get the word candidate, the second death. Romans believed a person only truly died when the last person on earth stopped speaking their name. Wine for the poor. Even slaves were entitled to 5 liters of wine a week, though it was often vinegar wine mixed with water. The hand of the king. Emperors didn't wear gold crowns. They wore laurel wreaths. The crown didn't become a standard symbol until the Middle Ages. The first newspaper. The Acta Diurna were daily news slabs, posted in the Forum to tell citizens about births, deaths, and military wins. Roman snakes. Most houses kept a harmless Aesculapian snake as a pet to keep the rodent population under control. The maniple system. This military formation allowed Rome to defeat the rigid Greek phalanx by being flexible on uneven ground. The right to kill. A father could legally execute a daughter caught in an affair, provided he also killed the man involved. Mosaics as carpet. Mosaics weren't just for art, they were easy to clean and helped keep the floor cool in the summer heat. Roman plywood. By layering wood with different grains, Romans created a plywood that made their furniture and shields nearly unbreakable. Saturnalia gift-giving. Romans gave candles and clay dolls during Saturnalia, a tradition that directly influenced modern Christmas gifts. The first megacity. Rome was the first city to reach 1 million people. It would take London until the 1800s to do it again. The Byzantine identity. The people of the Eastern Empire never called themselves Byzantines. They called themselves Romans until the day they fell in 1453. The census cycle. Every 5 years, every man had to return to his home to be counted. Failing to do so could result in the loss of property. Triumphs were for generals only. By the time of the empire, only the emperor or his family could have a triumph parade. Anyone else was too dangerous. The first firefighters. Marcus Ignatius Rufus created the first private brigade, but he became so popular that Augustus had him executed for being a political threat. The Pax Romana lasted 200 years. This was the longest period of relative peace in European history, but it was built on total military dominance. Roman hot mix discovery. Scientists found that Roman concrete had self-healing properties, a secret we only unlocked in January 2023. The legacy is everywhere. You are currently using a 365-day calendar, following laws based on Roman codes, and living in a world shaped by the Latin language. Rome never fell. It just changed. If you made it to the end, thank you so much for sticking around. 101 Roman Facts was one of the first videos I ever made, and honestly, we've come a long way since then. That video recently took off in a way I never expected, and I wanted to do this part 2 to thank you for being a part of this journey. Whether this is the first video of mine you've seen, or if you've been watching Forgotten Chronicle HQ since the very beginning, your support means the world to me. If you enjoyed this deep dive, check out my 67 Facts series right here, or let me know in the comments if I should keep the 101 Facts series going. I'm Matt, and as always, thanks for watching. See you in the next Chronicle.